Welcome to your first class in Rhinoceros. In this class, we'll cover the basic interface for Rhino, as well as the basic tools for navigation and checking the object properties for your object. So we'll start off by having a look at our top left-hand corner, and you'll see we have a standard file menu bar system. So under File, we have the options to open and import and export files. We have options to edit or adjust how we work with a document. And then these rest of these options, view, curve, surface, solid, mesh, all of those allow us to access our tools, the same tools we would find here, but in a menu-based system. Now, exactly those same tools are available under separated tabs, grouping them according to what it is they do. So whether it is displaying our object, or it is transforming our objects, or drawing curves, or creating surfaces, those tools are divided under different tabs. But to start off, we're going to work in our standard tab, which gives us access to almost all of our tools at a quick glance. All right, so let's have a look at how we can navigate inside Rhino and then check our objects. So firstly, we'll have a look at our main workspace, which is divided into 4 windows. You'll see, firstly, we have top, perspective, right, and front view. And those represent the views of that object. Now, if I'd like to move around in any one of those windows, I simply move my cursor to that window, and I can use my scroll wheel on my mouse to zoom out or in. Now, Rhino works very specifically. It zooms to where you've placed your cursor. So if you place your cursor over here off to the right and zoom in, it'll zoom to there. Zoom out again, place the cursor on the object, and it'll zoom in. So it zooms to where you want it to look. Similarly, you can zoom in and out in all 3 of these viewports, or 4 of these viewports. But what might happen every now and then is you might zoom out so far you can't actually see your object, or the opposite thereof, you might zoom in so close that you have no idea where you are anymore. At this point in time, it's best just to reset your windows or your viewports to get back to where you were. And we do that by simply clicking on this 4 viewport icon up here in your standard toolbar. If you click it once, it resets all of your views and you are back to where you know you are. All right, it's easy to get lost sometimes, so that's the easy way of resetting your windows to get back to where you want to. Now, secondly, I can navigate this window by right-clicking and dragging, and that allows me to pan 2-dimensionally in my top window, in my front window, or right window. Now, if I apply that same trick using my right-click and panning, in my perspective view, you'll see you pan in 3-dimensional space. So you can view your object from the top, or the bottom, or the side, whichever way you want to. And again, you simply click that window there, and it resets all of your windows. So that's how you change your viewports and navigate within your viewports. Now, sometimes you don't see enough detail within this small window. We can maximize that window by simply double-clicking on its name, and there you go. Now you can see more of that view. Again, same if you want to reset, click the 4-port view, and you have all 4 of your viewports back again. Next up, we can actually check or assess an object in Rhino to know what it is we're looking at. And we do that by firstly selecting the object. And over here on right-hand side, this is the Object Properties tab. Now I can inspect that object by clicking on Details, and it'll show me a window. I'll give you a close-up in the video, and it'll show you exactly what the object is. It'll tell you it's a valid polysurface, and it's also a closed polysurface. That means it can exist in this world. It's a valid solid thing you can hold. If it says valid open polysurface, it means it's not a closed whole unit, which means we can't actually 3D print or produce it that way. We need or we strive for valid closed polysurfaces. Okay? All right, so back to this view. I'm going to reset my views really quickly. Now I'd like to be able to change how I perceive my object. Now, right now, all I see is just a few black lines. It doesn't really give me an idea of what it is I'm looking at. Technically, I'm looking at a solid, valid, closed polysurface cube with the X side, the Y side, and the Z side clearly marked. This is actually made up out of surfaces, not lines. How do I see that in Rhino? Because this view currently is what we refer to as a wireframe view. In other words, lines represent solid objects. I can change that. I can be able to view this as a solid object. So if I am active in the perspective window, I can change how I perceive my object. If I right-click this tool, you'll see it has a little arrow underneath it. That means there are tools nested underneath it. I right-click that, and it gives me all of my view options. Now, if you hover over those, it'll say wireframe, shaded, shade, and rendered viewport. Now, those are the ones we're going to use most often, along with ghosted viewport. So wireframe, you can already see, you pretty much see through, I'm going to maximize this viewport, see through my object and see the stuff behind it. Now, if I change the view mode for this port to shaded viewport, you'll see now I can actually see it's a solid object. I can't see through it anymore. Well, this is good. You know where your surfaces are, but it can be bad in the sense that it can obscure other objects that are actually behind this. So you can change to ghosted viewport, which means you can see it's a solid object, but you can still see through it or the inside, what's inside of it. This is also very handy. Now, my personal preference is to use this ghosted viewport for my perspective view and remain in wireframe for top, front, and right, so I have a clear idea of what's going on and what might be behind this if I do select things. That's my personal preference, so I suggest you start there as well. But to make things more interesting, we can also change to what's referred to as rendered viewport, and that allows us to add a texture to our object. In this case, I have a marble texture on my object. Now, you can add textures, just like I have, by selecting the object. Instead of being in the Object Properties view, we go to Materials. And in Materials, we can assign a material, and thus a texture, to this object. We can swap to something like brick, or we can swap to marble, or we can swap to basically anything by just clicking on Use New Material and selecting a material from our preset list of materials that come loaded in Rhino. You can also import your own images to add a custom texture if you would want to. Right, so that is changing how we view our object in Rhino and navigating within Rhino. Next up, I want to show you how we might be able to work in layers, just like you're used to working in layers in other creative softwares like Adobe Photoshop. We can change or assign objects to different layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to say Control-C to copy this object, Control-V to paste, and I'm just going to drag the object to there to move it. Now that you can do in Rhino, you can just click on something and drag it, and it moves it in three-dimensional space like you see there. But the upside now is to make your life easier as you work, you can move over here to the Layers tab. Now right now, you always start off on the default layer. And all of our objects are on that default layer, but we can change that if we want to. You can select an object and then right-click on any one of these layers. So let's say layer 1, right-click it and say Change Object Layer. Now, what did that do? Basically nothing. Well, kind of. Now you see this cube is red. And the reason why is because the display color for layer 1 is red. I can change that if I wanted to. I can click on that cube. I'll get a pop-up menu and I can change the color to something like blue and hit OK. And now my layer is blue. But the difference is I can now click this light bulb icon to turn that layer on and off. Now you see there's a tick mark right there. That means my default layer is the layer I'm actually working on. Again, I can change that by clicking on layer 1 to change the tick mark. And now I can turn the default layer on and off. That way you can really make your designs very, very complex with multiple things interacting, but be able to change what you see by doing it on different layers. All right, so that is navigation within Rhino and being able to see everything you need to see. That was your very first class. Thank you.